The admiral sat alone in the great council chamber, but his heart was not proud. His body was still, yet his hands trembled slightly as if they remembered the fire of the battle. Around him, silence filled the air, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside. The council had summoned him to explain what had happened, and even before they spoke, he already knew their questions. How could a fleet so mighty, so carefully built over centuries, be destroyed by a single enemy ship? How could a commander of his reputation return with shame instead of victory? His eyes lowered, but his mind could not escape the visions of destruction that burned in his memory. He remembered the moment when the battle began, when the screens around his command seat showed hundreds of ships in formation. The fleet stretched far into the void, a wall of power that no enemy had ever broken before. He had believed that nothing could stop them, that the humans were nothing more than an annoyance to be swept away in a storm of fire. The admiral had stood tall then, certain of the victory to come. Yet now, as he sat in the council chamber, that memory felt like mockery. His officers had looked to him during the battle with trust in their eyes. They believed his voice, his orders, his experience. For decades, he had commanded fleets across the stars, conquering system after system. He was known as the one who never faltered, who never hesitated, and who never lost. But in that single encounter, all his victories felt meaningless. His confidence had crumbled the moment he realized that the humans fought in a way unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. The pain of that realization weighed on him heavier than chains. When the council members finally entered, their eyes were cold. They were leaders of the Empire, beings of power and pride, yet they looked at him with quiet suspicion. They did not speak right away. They waited, letting the silence grow, forcing him to carry the weight of his own failure. He wanted to speak, to explain, but his throat felt dry. His mind whispered the words he did not want to say. We outnumbered them 100-1, and still we lost. He tried to hold those words back, but the truth pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. His thoughts turned to the battlefield again, to the burning wrecks of alien ships drifting in cold space. He could see them as clearly as if the battle had just ended. He remembered the sudden shock when the first ship fell. It had been fast, too fast for his mind to accept. That one explosion had been the first crack in the armor of their pride, the first whisper of fear. His crews had shouted, his officers had looked to him, but even he had no answer to what was happening. It was as if the universe itself had turned against them. The admiral lowered his gaze, ashamed. He had been the one to call the humans weak, the one to laugh when they demanded respect. He had promised the council that the battle would be swift and glorious, that their enemies would be crushed. Now he had returned, not with triumph, but with the ghosts of his soldiers. The shame of it burned inside him. But even deeper than shame was fear. For the first time in his long life, the admiral feared an enemy. The council chamber was vast, its walls lined with banners of past victories. Each symbol represented centuries of conquest, each color a story of domination. As he looked at them, the admiral felt hollow. Those banners had once filled him with pride, but now they mocked him. What use were victories of the past when the present had been shattered so completely? His fleet, the largest ever assembled, had been reduced to wreckage. His people, who believed themselves untouchable, now stood vulnerable. He had lived long enough to know that fear spreads faster than fire, and soon all worlds of the Empire would whisper the same question. How could this happen? He tried to steady himself, gripping the armrest of his seat, but the tremble in his hands betrayed him. He could still hear the voices of his dying crews, the screams cut short by silence. He could still smell the faint trace of smoke from his own burning warship, even though it was far away now. He could still see the cold, focused eyes of the human commander on the screen before the final strike. That image alone haunted him more than all others. Humans did not fight like beasts or machines. They fought with will, with fire in their spirit. That fire had consumed his fleet, and no amount of numbers could smother it. The admiral knew the council wanted excuses. They wanted him to blame faulty weapons, poor intelligence, or betrayal, but none of those were true. The truth was simple, and it terrified him. The humans were not weak. They were not fragile. They were dangerous in a way the Empire had never understood. He felt the weight of that truth pressing down on him as heavily as the eyes of the council. He wanted to shout it, to make them understand, but fear held his voice. For once in his long career, the admiral was not only a defeated commander, he was a broken man. The chamber remained silent. The admiral lifted his eyes slowly, and the council members leaned forward, waiting. He saw judgment in their faces, but also curiosity, as if they sensed he had seen something beyond battle. His lips parted, and though his voice was low, it carried the weight of all his fear and shame. The words were simple, but they would shake the Empire forever. We outnumbered them 100 to 1 and still lost everything. The alien empire had always been proud of its fleets. For centuries, they had spread across the stars, taking world after world, crushing any who resisted. Their ships were built in colossal shipyards, each vessel carrying the strength of thousands. Generations of alien citizens had grown up hearing stories of victories, of battles where their admirals outnumbered their enemies and erased them from the stars. No one questioned their supremacy. No one doubted that their fleets were the strongest force the galaxy had ever seen. The admiral had been raised in this same belief. From his earliest days as a cadet, he had been told that the Empire's destiny was to dominate, and he had proven himself worthy of that belief. He had climbed the ranks faster than most, his skill and determination making him a legend before he was even old. Victories lined his record, each battle another star added to his name. His officers respected him, his soldiers trusted him, and his enemies feared him. He had never lost, not once, and the idea of defeat was something he could not even imagine. When the humans first appeared on the edge of the Empire's space, they were not taken seriously. Reports described them as small, weak, and reckless. Their ships were crude by the Empire's standards, their technology far behind. Council members laughed when humans sent envoys demanding recognition as equals. To the Empire, they were like insects, fragile, unimportant, and easy to crush. The Admiral himself had called them a curious distraction, something that would be dealt with in time. The day came when the humans finally challenged the Empire openly. They claimed that the Empire's expansion had crossed into their space, that their colonies had been threatened, and that they would not bow down. The Admiral was assigned to silence them. For him, it was not a mission of war, but a demonstration. He believed the humans needed to see the power of the Empire, to tremble at the sight of hundreds of warships moving as one. He thought it would take hours, perhaps even minutes, for them to surrender or be destroyed. The fleet he commanded that day was the largest the Empire had ever sent against a single enemy. Over 100 ships, from the smallest frigates to massive carriers, all armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy planets. Each ship was crewed by disciplined soldiers who had trained for years, drilled to obey every command. Their morale was high. They trusted their numbers. They trusted their weapons. And most of all, they trusted their admiral. The humans, by comparison, brought only one vessel, one ship against an entire armada. The admiral had laughed when he first saw it appear on the scanners. The officers around him smirked. Some of the younger crew even mocked the humans aloud, calling them fools for daring to face such overwhelming force. The admiral allowed the laughter because he agreed with it. In his mind, the battle was already won before the first shot was fired. The armada's ships moved into formation, stretching across the darkness like a wall of steel and fire. It was a sight designed to break the enemy's spirit before the fighting even began. The admiral knew that most enemies surrendered the moment they saw such a display. It was the Empire's way, crush hope before the first strike. To him, the humans had no chance. He thought they would run or perhaps beg for mercy. But they did not. The human ship stayed where it was, small but steady, as if it did not fear the endless power arrayed against it. The admiral noticed it then, a detail that unsettled him, though he pushed it aside. The human vessel did not drift or hesitate. It held its place with perfect calm. Its weapons were not raised wildly, but prepared with precision. There was no panic in its movements. The humans were not begging or fleeing. They were waiting. It was a quiet defiance, one that did not fit with the image of weakness the Empire had painted of them. Still, the admiral brushed the thought away. Numbers had never failed him before. One ship could not stand against 100. He had fought too many battles to believe otherwise. He told himself the humans were only pretending to be brave, that they were already broken inside. His fleet, the pride of the Empire, was enough to erase them in a single storm of fire. He smiled when he gave the order to prepare weapons. This would not be war. This would be a lesson, a display of why no one challenged the Empire. The soldiers on his ships were eager, ready to prove their strength once again. They looked at the human vessel as prey, something to be hunted, destroyed, and forgotten. They had no doubt, no fear, only confidence. The admiral felt the same. He stood tall at the center of his command bridge, the banners of the Empire glowing behind him, certain that this battle would add another victory to his name. What none of them understood then was that the humans had not come to fight as the Empire fought. They had not come to win through numbers or to rely on sheer size. They had come with something different, something the admiral and his people had never faced before. At that moment, before the first shot was fired, the Empire still believed in its invincibility. The admiral still believed in the strength of his fleet. The soldiers still believed they were untouchable. And that belief was the shield that would soon shatter into nothing. The order was given, and the void between the two forces lit up with fire. Alien cruisers, destroyers, and carriers unleashed their weapons in a coordinated strike. Plasma cannons burned white-hot, missiles streaked across the darkness, and beams of energy tore through space toward the single human ship. The admiral watched from his command seat, confident that nothing could survive such an overwhelming storm. He expected the human vessel to shatter instantly, reduced to drifting fragments before his fleet even needed to reload. But when the fire cleared, the ship was still there, not destroyed, not even touched. At first, the admiral thought it was luck. Perhaps the shots had missed by chance, or the humans had simply been fortunate. But then he saw how the human vessel moved. It darted between blasts with impossible precision, rolling and weaving through attacks as if it had predicted every strike before it came. Its engines flared bright, and its movements were not wild but sharp, calculated like the strokes of a master blade. The admiral leaned forward, his earlier certainty replaced by something colder. This was no accident. The human ship struck back. With a flash of light, a single railgun round cut across the void and smashed into one of the alien destroyers. The ship erupted in flames, its hull torn open as fire spilled into space. The explosion echoed across the fleet's communication channels, cries of shock and disbelief rising from the crews who had just watched one of their own be destroyed. One shot. One precise strike. The admiral's chest tightened. That should have been impossible. Their destroyers had shields strong enough to withstand a barrage, but the human weapon had found the exact point to break through. Officers on the bridge shouted updates, trying to explain what had happened, but their words were panicked. The admiral forced himself to stay calm, though his mind was racing. He ordered the fleet to close in, to surround the human vessel and crush it with sheer numbers. Ships shifted formation, tightening the circle, filling every angle with fire. Once again, they unleashed a storm. And once again, the human ship slipped through it like a phantom, untouched, unharmed, and always moving. The admiral felt the first crack of doubt then. He had fought many enemies before, some cunning, some desperate, but none had ever fought like this. The humans did not run. They did not panic. Their one small ship moved with the confidence of a predator among prey. Every time the Empire's warships adjusted their aim, the humans were already gone, sliding into a new position, preparing another strike. Another flash, another explosion. This time, a cruiser vanished in fire, its hull breaking apart as hundreds of lives were lost in seconds. The admiral gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles tight. The humans were not supposed to be able to do this. A single ship was not supposed to outfight the pride of the Empire's armada. Yet here it was, making a mockery of their strength. The crews of his ships began to falter. Reports came in of hesitation, of gunners missing their targets because they could not predict the humans' movements. The admiral barked orders, demanding discipline, but even he could not deny what was happening before his eyes. Every strike from the humans hit with terrifying accuracy, while the Empire's weapons seemed slow, clumsy, and blind. Numbers, once their greatest advantage, now looked meaningless. For the first time in his long career, the admiral felt something he had never allowed himself to feel in battle: Fear. It crept into his chest as he realized the humans were not fighting with brute force. They were fighting with intelligence, with instincts sharper than his people could match. Each move they made was bold, reckless even. But behind that recklessness was precision. The humans were gambling everything, and every gamble was paying off. He watched as another squadron broke formation, their captains losing nerve as they tried to pull away. But before they could escape, the human ship struck again, tearing through them one by one. The admiral slammed his fist against the armrest, furious at their weakness. But deep down he knew it wasn't only weakness, it was terror. His soldiers had never seen anything like this. None of them had. The bridge was filled with voices now, urgent and desperate. Officers reported shield failures, ships colliding in confusion, fleets scattering. The admiral tried to steady them, tried to restore order, but his commands were drowned out by the chaos unfolding across his armada. His mind raced back to the first strike, that single railgun round that had shattered a destroyer in one blow. That was the moment his confidence had cracked. That was when he had realized the humans were not prey. They were hunters. He stared at the human ship on the main display. It was small, insignificant compared to his vast fleet, yet it moved with the presence of a giant. His own ships, massive and proud, suddenly seemed slow and fragile. The admiral felt the weight of the truth pressing against him. They had underestimated the humans. They had mistaken size for strength, numbers for victory, and now, with every passing second, they were paying the price for their arrogance. The humans did not fight with the fear of being outnumbered. They fought as if they had already won, as if every move was part of a plan that only they could see. To the admiral, it was as though the humans had studied his people, learned their weaknesses, and turned their pride into a weapon against them. He clenched his jaw, refusing to admit the thought out loud, but in the silence of his mind, he knew. The battle was no longer about numbers. It was about something far more dangerous. The humans were showing the galaxy what it truly meant to fight. The admiral's eyes followed the human ship as it weaved through the chaos like a shadow no weapon could touch. He ordered new formations, tighter nets meant to trap the humans in a wall of fire, but every time the net closed, the humans slipped through a gap no one had seen. His officers shouted adjustments, but they were always a second too late. The humans moved as if they knew the Empire's playbook better than the Empire itself. What should have been a slow and crushing victory was turning into a nightmare. Every maneuver from the humans looked reckless to alien eyes. They dove directly into danger, flew through the narrowest spaces between ships, and even allowed themselves to drift as if their engines had failed, only to spring alive and strike with precision. To the admiral, it felt like watching a predator dance inside a cage of clumsy hunters. Every time his ships aimed, the humans were already gone. Every time he thought he had them cornered, they twisted free. It was not luck. It was mastery. The alien fleet was built on discipline. They trained to follow orders, to move as one body, to strike with overwhelming unity. But unity became a weakness. The humans cut through it like a blade through cloth. They anticipated how the fleet would react, turning their vast numbers into a predictable pattern. Instead of being trapped, the humans used the Empire's strength against them. The first time it happened, the admiral did not believe his eyes. The human ship darted between two cruisers, drawing their fire. In the confusion, both alien ships blasted each other, shields shattering, hulls cracking. Alarms filled the comms as the two vessels burned. The admiral's chest tightened. It was unthinkable. His fleet was not supposed to harm itself, yet the humans had made it happen without even firing a shot. He tried to regain control. His voice echoed through the fleet, commanding order, demanding focus. But the humans struck again. This time they skimmed dangerously close to a carrier, using it as cover. Alien gunners hesitated to fire, afraid of hitting their own. That single hesitation cost them dearly as the humans swung around and blasted a destroyer from behind. The destroyer exploded in a chain reaction, taking another ship with it. The fleet's formation broke further. The admiral could hear the panic in his officers' voices. Reports came in from every direction. Systems failing, crews losing nerve, ships colliding as they tried to adjust. Soldiers who had once believed themselves untouchable were now terrified. The enemy's single vessel moved like a ghost, impossible to pin down, impossible to predict. Discipline crumbled, and chaos spread faster than he could contain. His mind searched for answers. The Empire had never faced this before. Their enemies always relied on numbers, brute strength, or desperation. But humans relied on none of that. They fought as if the battle was a game they had already studied. Every reckless dive was planned, every risk calculated. It was as if they saw not just the present moment, but every possible move the fleet could make, and always chose the one path to survive. Another squadron tried to surround the human ship, 4 vessels moving in perfect unison to trap it in a deadly crossfire. For a moment, the admiral thought this would be it, that they would finally crush their prey. But then the humans did something insane. They cut their engines, drifting powerless in the void. The alien ships, expecting resistance, fired too soon, their beams colliding in the center. In that split second of confusion, the human engines roared back to life and their railgun fired. One alien ship was torn apart instantly. The others scattered, terrified. Their perfect trap turned into a disaster. The admiral slammed his fist against the armrest, fury mixing with disbelief. He had seen bold commanders before, but nothing like this. These humans did not fear death. They invited danger and turned it into advantage. He realized then that his fleet was fighting a different kind of war, one they had never trained for. The Empire had prepared for brute force, for endless firepower, for enemies who broke under pressure. But the humans thrived under pressure. They grew sharper, faster, deadlier the more outnumbered they were. His soldiers were not used to this. They had always been the hunters. Now, even with 100 ships, they felt like prey. Fear crept into their voices, hesitation into their hands, and hesitation was fatal. Each time a gunner hesitated, the humans struck. Each time a captain doubted, another alien ship burned. The admiral's pride began to collapse under the weight of the truth. This was not a battle of numbers. It was a battle of minds. The human commander outthought him at every turn, turning his proud armada into a clumsy mob. He tried to adapt, to change his tactics, but every adjustment came too late. The humans were already 3 steps ahead. He stared at the display, his heart sinking as more red markers, symbols of destroyed ships, appeared across the battlefield. His 100 vessels were dwindling, falling faster than he could believe. The humans did not attack wildly. They chose carefully, striking where it hurt most, breaking the fleet piece by piece. It was a slow humiliation, a lesson carved into fire and steel. The admiral's voice grew hoarse from shouting orders, but he knew deep down that no command could save them. His crews were losing faith, his ships were breaking apart, and the humans showed no sign of tiring. What terrified him most was not their weapons, but their will. No matter how outnumbered they were, the humans fought with the calm confidence of predators who knew the hunt was theirs. In that moment, as another of his cruisers vanished in a bloom of fire, the admiral understood the depth of their mistake. The Empire had underestimated the humans. They had believed numbers would decide the battle. But the humans were proving that numbers meant nothing against a mind that refused to break, against a spirit that turned desperation into victory. And the admiral realized with dread that his fleet, once the pride of the Empire, was being dismantled not by power, but by brilliance. The admiral sat stiff in his chair as his bridge filled with voices of fear. Officers shouted over one another, reporting ships breaking formation, weapons locking on the wrong targets, and captains begging for retreat. His own command deck, once a place of calm discipline, had turned into a storm of panic. The alien empire had never faced such humiliation. They had always been the predator. But now, even with 100 ships, they felt like prey hunted by a single human vessel. He roared for silence, his voice echoing across the bridge, but fear had already gripped the fleet. His soldiers, trained to obey, were no longer listening. He could sense it in the hesitation of their voices, in the desperate edge to their words. The humans had broken something deeper than formation. They had broken belief. The Empire's discipline, polished for centuries, was crumbling before his eyes. On the outer edge of the formation, 2 frigates misfired after their targeting systems went dark. For a heartbeat, the admiral thought it was a simple malfunction, but then the reports flooded in. The humans had hacked into their systems. Screens blinked, crosshairs shifted, and weapons turned against their own. The admiral's blood ran cold. It was impossible. His people's technology was the pride of the galaxy, unbreakable. But the humans had slipped inside their defenses like shadows. Now, the Empire's own weapons were betraying them. Across the fleet, ships fired blindly, some striking their allies, others losing control entirely. The void became a scene of madness, alien ships exploding not from enemy fire but from their own. The admiral slammed his fists down, ordering emergency overrides, but the commands lagged, delayed by corrupted systems. Sparks flew across consoles as engineers worked desperately to regain control, but the damage was spreading faster than they could repair. He looked up at the main screen and saw the human vessel weaving effortlessly through the chaos it had created. It did not need to fire often. It simply struck at the right place at the right time, letting the Empire destroy itself. The admiral's jaw clenched. Numbers meant nothing when numbers turned against you. He felt the crushing weight of betrayal, not from his soldiers, but from the arrogance that had blinded them. Voices filled the comms, captains screaming for permission to retreat. Some ignored orders entirely, pulling their ships back, fleeing from the battlefield in disgrace. But retreat did not save them. The humans chased with precision, cutting them down one by one. It was not mercy they offered, but a lesson carved in destruction. Arrogance had a price. The admiral shouted for his crews to steady themselves, to remember their training, but his words felt hollow. The crews no longer believed. They had seen ships larger and stronger than theirs torn apart by one human strike. They had watched their own guns turn against them. They had felt the sharp edge of fear for the first time in their lives, and it had broken them. He saw it in their eyes. Fear had replaced pride. Officers who once spoke with confidence now whispered nervously. Commanders who had once demanded obedience now begged for survival. Even the bridge itself felt colder, smaller, as though the human vessel outside pressed down upon them with invisible weight. Another explosion rocked the fleet. This time, a carrier, one of their largest ships, erupted in a blinding flash. Thousands of soldiers were gone in an instant. The shockwave rippled across nearby vessels, sending them spiraling into disarray. The bridge shook violently, and the admiral held onto the armrests, his teeth gritted. Each loss was like a knife driven deeper into his chest. His armada, his pride, was being erased piece by piece. He turned his thoughts inward for a brief moment, and a terrifying realization struck him. His fleet was not only losing, it was afraid to fight. The humans had turned the Empire's greatest strength, its discipline, into a weakness. They had made obedience into predictability, and predictability into death. His soldiers were not prepared for an enemy that embraced chaos, that thrived in risk, that found victory in madness. On the screen, the human vessel flickered through the wreckage, small but unshaken. It moved with confidence, almost with arrogance of its own. But it was not arrogance born of pride, it was born of something deeper. The admiral could feel it. The humans fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. And survival had made them sharper than any blade, deadlier than any fleet. A cold shiver ran down his spine as another squadron vanished into fire. His people had thought themselves masters of war, but now they were learning what war truly meant. War was not banners or numbers. War was not pride or formation. War was the will to adapt, to strike when everything seemed lost, to keep fighting, even when outnumbered 100-1. That was the will the humans carried, and it was crushing the Empire's armada. The admiral wanted to deny it, to cling to the image of his empire's strength, but the truth was painted across the stars in burning wrecks. His soldiers were not calling out victory chants. They were calling for help, for mercy, for escape. The humans had not just broken his fleet, they had broken the spirit of his people. He lowered his head slightly, his hands trembling despite his effort to stay composed. Around him, officers scrambled, alarms screamed, and the comms were filled with desperate voices. He was the admiral of the largest fleet ever assembled, yet he felt powerless. The humans were not only defeating them, they were teaching them what true fear felt like, and that fear was spreading faster than any fire. The admiral realized then that even if some ships survived, the Empire would never be the same. Their myth of invincibility had been shattered. Their people would never look at humans as weak again. In fact, they would whisper about this battle for generations, not as a victory, But as the day, the Empire's pride was torn apart by one fragile-looking species that refused to bow. The Admiral stood frozen as chaos swallowed his fleet. Screens flickered red with the signs of dying ships, voices screamed over comms, and explosions bloomed like fireflowers in the dark void. Every corner of the battlefield was breaking apart, and yet the human vessel still moved with terrifying control. It was smaller than almost any ship in his armada, yet it carved through them with precision, each strike timed so perfectly that it seemed less like war and more like execution. His warship shuddered as a shockwave passed through. Somewhere close, another of his cruisers had been reduced to ash. He could hear his crew panicking as they tried to stabilize the systems. Sparks rained from consoles, alarms blared, but all of it felt distant to him. His mind was heavy with disbelief. For the first time in his career, he saw the truth. Numbers did not matter. Pride did not matter. The humans were dismantling everything he believed was unshakable. He watched as the human ship executed a maneuver no sane commander would dare. It cut straight through the center of his formation, passing dangerously close to 3 of his carriers. Any other vessel would have been destroyed instantly, but the human commander moved like he already knew where every shot would land. The carriers turned their guns, desperate to trap it, but the humans twisted at the last moment. The alien ships fired, their blasts missing the target and colliding with each other instead. 2 carriers went dark, one tearing apart in a violent explosion. The bridge crew gasped in horror. The Admiral's hands tightened on the armrests, his claws digging into the metal. He could not understand it. The humans were not fighting with superior technology. Their weapons were simple, their ships smaller, their numbers laughable. And yet they fought as if the universe itself bent to their will. They refused to make mistakes, and his fleet could do nothing but stumble into its own destruction. Reports filled his ears. One officer screamed that their shield grid was failing. Another shouted that several squadrons were gone. His comm screens filled with faces of captains, their expressions broken by fear. Some begged for retreat. Others demanded orders, but all of them carried the same terror in their voices. These were captains who had once boasted of their strength, who had once believed the Empire could never be defeated. Now they were pleading like children. The Admiral roared at them to fight, to hold their positions, but his words carried no weight anymore. The humans had stripped away their faith in victory. He could see it in their eyes. Even if they obeyed him, their hearts were already lost. The battle was no longer about tactics, it was about survival, and the humans were the only ones still fighting with purpose. Then came the strike that broke him. A squadron of his finest battleships closed in on the human vessel. They were armed with the most advanced weapons of the Empire, shields layered thick enough to withstand storms. He believed, for a brief flicker of hope, that this would end it, that even the humans could not slip past such force. But the human ship accelerated, faster than they expected, and darted under their formation. In the blink of an eye, it released a weapon he had never seen before. A pulse of blue light rippled out, and all 4 battleships went dark at once. Their engines sputtered, their weapons shut down, their shields collapsed. The human vessel fired once, and one battleship erupted in fire. Another was torn in half as its powerless systems left it defenseless. The last 2 collided in their confusion, breaking apart in silence. The Admiral's jaw tightened as he realized what had happened. The humans had designed a weapon that targeted systems directly, bypassing armor and shields. It was a weapon of precision, not brute force, and it was devastating. He felt a cold weight in his chest. His empire had mocked the humans as backward, primitive, weak. Yet here was proof that they had developed weapons beyond the Empire's imagination. What else were they hiding? What other horrors had they prepared in the shadows while his people laughed at them? His warship shook again as debris from a destroyed cruiser slammed into their hull. Lights flickered and smoke filled the air. He coughed, waving it away, but his eyes never left the display. Half his fleet was gone, and the rest were falling apart. His officers no longer shouted with pride, they shouted with despair. He could hear tears in their voices, raw fear that he had never allowed in his bridge before. He wanted to deny it, to find some excuse that made sense, but the truth pressed against him like a crushing tide. The humans were not only fighting to win, they were sending a message. Every strike, every maneuver, every humiliation was deliberate. They wanted the Empire to understand that their time of dominance was ending. That fear belonged not to humans, but to those who underestimated them. The admiral leaned forward, his hands trembling. He had lived through countless battles, faced enemies who threw everything they had at the Empire, but none had ever broken him like this. The humans had taken his armada, the strongest symbol of their supremacy, and turned it into wreckage. They had shown him that discipline and numbers were nothing against a will that refused to surrender. A whisper of despair slipped into his thoughts. For the first time, he wondered if survival was even possible. Could any of his ships escape this? Or would the humans hunt every last one of them down to make their lesson clear? He swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility dragging at his chest. Thousands of lives had already been lost under his command. Thousands more were about to vanish, all because he had underestimated one fragile-looking species. Another explosion shook the bridge, throwing officers to the floor. The admiral gripped his seat, his breath heavy. He could feel the end coming closer. His warship, once a fortress, was now nothing more than another target. He turned his eyes once more to the human vessel on the screen. It moved with grace and certainty, glowing faintly in the dark like a predator's eye. The breaking point had arrived. His pride was shattered, his armada gone, his spirit hollow. He was no longer a commander of the Empire's might. He was simply a witness to the moment everything they believed in died. And in that silence between explosions, the admiral finally admitted to himself the truth he had denied for too long. The humans were not weak. They were unstoppable. The battlefield was silent now, but not with peace. Silence came because there were no more voices to fill the comms, no more orders shouted across squadrons, no more cries of fear from captains watching their ships burn. The great fleet, the pride of the Empire, had been reduced to drifting wrecks. Broken hulls floated in the dark void, fires burned faintly before dying into cold ashes, and thousands of lives had vanished into nothing. Out of 100 ships, only a handful flickered weakly, their engines crippled, their crews lost in despair. The admiral sat rigid in his command chair, but his body felt hollow. His eyes stared blankly at the screen in front of him, which no longer showed a proud formation of ships, but only the scattered remains of his once invincible armada. His mouth was dry, his throat tight, and he could feel the slow tremor of his hands. He had faced defeat for the first time in his life, and it was not just defeat, it was humiliation. He thought back to the start of the battle, when his officers laughed at the sight of a single human ship. He remembered the confidence he had felt, the pride in his chest as he promised the council that he would return with an easy victory. That pride now burned like poison inside him. He had not only lost, he had been outwitted, outmaneuvered, and utterly broken by an enemy his people had called fragile. His heart ached with shame, but it ached even more with fear. On the screen, the human ship remained. It was scarred from battle, its hull blackened in places, but it was still alive, still steady. It glided through the wreckage calmly, like a predator walking across the corpses of its prey. The admiral could not look away from it. To him, it no longer looked small. It looked enormous, casting a shadow that stretched across everything he had ever known. His crew sat in silence, too afraid to speak. They avoided his eyes, some staring at their consoles, others trembling quietly. They knew what he knew. The Empire's illusion of supremacy had been shattered. They had believed numbers made them strong, but numbers had betrayed them. They had believed discipline would never falter, but discipline had collapsed the moment fear touched their hearts. They had believed no species could ever challenge their rule, but humans had done more than challenge. They had conquered the spirit of the Empire without even needing a fleet. The comms cracked faintly, and a voice from one of the surviving captains begged for direction. The admiral could not answer. What direction could he give? There was no strategy left, no plan, no hope. He had no victory to offer, no retreat to order. He had nothing. The admiral, who had been the Empire's most trusted commander, sat frozen in the ruins of everything he had once commanded. He closed his eyes for a moment, and the faces of his soldiers appeared in his mind. Faces of the crews who had trusted him, who had believed in his orders, who had given their lives in a battle they never had a chance to win. Their voices seemed to echo in his ears, calling to him from the void. It felt as though their ghosts pressed against his shoulders, demanding an answer for why they had been sacrificed. He could not bear it. His chest felt heavy, his breath shallow. When he finally opened his eyes, the council chamber came back to him in memory. He imagined their stern faces, their sharp questions, their hunger for explanations. What could he tell them? How could he describe what he had seen? The Empire would demand excuses, but he had none. They would demand blame, but he could not lie. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and it was a truth that would shake the Empire to its core. He whispered the words to himself before he dared to speak them aloud. His voice was faint, trembling. We outnumbered them 100 to 1, and still we lost everything. Saying it aloud felt like cutting his own flesh. His officers on the bridge looked up, their faces pale, their hearts sinking further. The words carried the weight of finality. There was no way to deny it anymore. The admiral leaned forward in his chair, his eyes still locked on the human vessel moving through the wreckage. He could not hate them. He had tried, but hatred was too small to hold what he felt. It was fear, yes, but also something deeper, a recognition. The humans had shown a strength his people did not understand. It was not in their weapons, though those were deadly. It was not in their numbers, for they had none. It was in their will. A will that could not be crushed, a will that thrived when cornered, a will that turned weakness into power. He realized then that his empire had made a mistake far greater than underestimating human technology. They had underestimated the human spirit. It was not something that could be measured in fleets or counted in soldiers. It was something invisible yet unbreakable. Against that, the Empire's discipline had crumbled like dust. The comms went quiet again, and the Admiral's voice was the only sound in the room. He repeated his words, louder this time, though his voice still shook. We outnumbered them 100 to 1, and still we lost everything. He said it not only for his officers but for himself, as if forcing the truth into his own bones. The words were bitter, but they were all he had left. Around him, silence returned. The surviving crew did not argue, they did not comfort. They simply sat in the heavy weight of those words, knowing the empire they served would never be the same. The admiral lowered his head. His body slumped, as if the strength had drained out of him. He was no longer the proud commander who had promised victory. He was a broken man, a witness to the day his empire's pride had died. And in the cold silence of the void, with the wreckage of 100 ships drifting around him, the admiral finally understood that his name would be remembered, not as the greatest commander of the empire, but as the one who had seen humanity's true strength and lived to speak of it. The empire's palace halls were silent when the admiral returned. His footsteps echoed against the polished stone as he walked toward the council chamber. Once, his arrival would have been celebrated with banners, music, and salutes. Now, there was only cold air and the weight of eyes watching him with suspicion. Guards who once stood tall in respect now looked at him as if he carried a disease. He felt the shame pressing down heavier with each step, but shame was not the only thing inside him. Fear lingered in his chest, sharp and unrelenting, for he carried a truth that no one wanted to hear. The council sat waiting, their thrones raised above the chamber floor, their faces lit by the glow of banners representing centuries of conquest. They had built their power on victories that stretched across the stars. To them, the empire was eternal, unshakable. When the admiral entered, they expected to hear excuses, to be told that some accident or betrayal had caused the disaster. But when they looked into his eyes, they saw something that shook them more than his words ever could. His spirit was broken. He stood before them, his uniform torn and burned, his shoulders heavy. For a long moment, he could not speak. The silence stretched until one of the council members demanded an explanation. Their voice was sharp, impatient, but beneath it was unease. They wanted to believe this was just another loss that could be repaired with more ships, more soldiers, more discipline. But the admiral knew the truth was larger than that. Finally, his voice broke the silence. Low, trembling, but clear enough to carry across the chamber. We outnumbered them 100 to 1, and still we lost everything. The words echoed through the hall, falling like stones into deep water. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some council members laughed bitterly, calling it impossible. Others scowled, demanding proof. But the admiral's eyes never wavered. He had seen the fire of the humans with his own eyes, and no argument could erase it. He told them how the humans fought, not with superior numbers, but with willpower that turned desperation into strength. He described their reckless maneuvers that should have ended in death, but instead cut through his fleet like a knife. He spoke of their weapons, precise and terrifying, not designed for show, but for devastating results. And he told them of the fear they spread, how discipline crumbled and pride dissolved the moment his soldiers realized they were facing something they did not understand. The council tried to interrupt him, but his voice grew stronger. He had nothing left to protect, no reputation worth saving. The shame of his defeat had burned away all pride, leaving only raw truth. "You call them weak," he said, "but weakness does not move like a shadow through fire. Weakness does not turn our own weapons against us. Weakness does not make one ship destroy an armada. They are not weak. They are dangerous." The chamber grew tense. Some of the council shifted uneasily in their seats, unwilling to admit fear but unable to deny it. The admiral's words painted a picture they could not ignore. He was not speaking like a defeated commander searching for excuses. He was speaking like a man who had seen something greater than himself, something that had changed him forever. He ended his report with a warning. His voice cracked, but every syllable carried weight. "Do not mistake humans for fragile again. If you do, we will not only lose battles, we will lose the Empire itself." His words hung in the air long after he finished. No one spoke immediately. The silence was heavy, filled with the realization that the world they knew had shifted. Outside the council chamber, the news spread quickly. Whispers filled the streets, carried by officials and soldiers who heard fragments of the admiral's words. 100-1, they whispered, and still they lost. Fear spread faster than fire. Citizens who had always believed in the Empire's strength began to question it. Soldiers who had marched proudly now carried doubt in their eyes. The myth of invincibility, built over centuries, had cracked in a single battle. The admiral returned to his quarters alone. He sat in silence, his mind replaying every moment of the battle. He could still see the human ship darting between explosions, still hear the cries of his crews, still feel the weight of his own helplessness. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred inside him: respect. The humans had done what no one else had dared. They had stood against the greatest force in the galaxy and turned certain death into victory. It was not only their weapons or tactics that haunted him. It was their spirit, unyielding and fierce, that had carried them through. He thought of the young human commander whose face had appeared on his screen before the final strike. Calm eyes, steady voice, no arrogance, only certainty. That image would never leave him. It was the face of someone who fought not for conquest, but for survival, for something greater than pride. The admiral realized then that the humans were not fighting just a battle. They were fighting to prove they belonged in the stars, and they had proved it with blood and fire. The Empire would try to cover the truth, to twist the story, to hide the scale of the defeat. But the admiral knew it would not matter. The truth had already taken root. Fear would whisper from world to world, spreading through the Empire like a shadow, and in every whisper the same warning would be heard. The humans are not weak. They are the most dangerous enemy the galaxy has ever faced. The admiral lowered his head into his hands, exhausted. He had lost everything: his fleet, his pride, his certainty. But he had gained something else: knowledge. He knew what humanity truly was. And as much as it terrified him, a part of him was strangely grateful to have seen it. For he understood now that the galaxy was changing. The age of the Empire was fading, and the age of humanity was beginning.